Hello, friends. For many years, certain authors and media outlets have persistently promoted the notion of an alleged military alliance between the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany, supposedly directed against Poland. In such interpretations, relations between Stalin and Hitler are often depicted as a kind of strategic partnership, a convenient pact to divide Polish lands between them. But how much truth is there in this claim? Let's turn to the timeline. Germany invaded Poland on September 1st, 1939. The Red Army, however, did not enter Polish territory until September 17th. No synchronized operations were observed between the two armies. If there had truly been a conspiracy for a joint invasion, Berlin would have immediately bombarded Moscow with diplomatic complaints over its delay. Yet no such correspondence exists in the archives. It's also important to remember that when Soviet troops crossed into Poland, the Polish government had already fled the country and was interned in Romania. The Polish state had effectively ceased to exist, its army scattered, its people abandoned.
By mid-September, German divisions had advanced deep into Poland, reaching the line of Grajewo, Białystok, and Brest, moving steadily southward. At that pace, they were only days away from reaching the Soviet border. In Moscow, alarm grew. Stalin and his generals realized that if they did not act, Germany could seize all of Poland. The collapse of the Polish government only reinforced those fears. Faced with this new reality, the Soviet leadership saw intervention as the only logical step. As Vyacheslav Molotov later explained, failing to act would have meant allowing the Wehrmacht to occupy every inch of Polish land right up to Soviet soil. Poland had refused cooperation with the USSR, and with the threat of a massive European war looming, Moscow decided to secure the territories it historically regarded as its own. German officers later confirmed how unexpected the Soviet move had been. General Heinz Guderian, whose armored corps had taken Brest, recalled his shock at the sudden arrival of Red Army units. In his memoirs, he admitted that the demarcation line along the Bug River had caught him completely off guard. He criticized the German Foreign Ministry for what he called an ill-considered diplomatic compromise that forced his troops to withdraw in haste, without even time to evacuate their wounded.
These accounts are supported by Soviet diplomatic records. On the night of September 17th, Stalin, Molotov, and Voroshilov summoned German diplomats in Moscow and issued an ultimatum. The Red Army would enter eastern Poland within hours, and German forces were to halt immediately and pull back to a defined line. They also demanded a ban on Luftwaffe flights east of that line, with a thinly veiled threat of Soviet airstrikes if Berlin disobeyed. Despite protests from the German military attaché, no delay was granted. In the days that followed, isolated Soviet air raids even targeted German units that had failed to withdraw. All of this evidence, the lack of coordination, the ultimatum, the confusion among German officers, and the Soviet demands shows that the Red Army's entry into Poland was not part of a prearranged plan. It was a rapid, reactive move to protect Soviet interests in a situation spiraling out of control.
Under pressure, Berlin had no choice but to comply. The Wehrmacht began retreating from areas now claimed by Moscow. The one city, Lvov, remained under German control. German diplomats claimed this was necessary to finish off Polish resistance, but their real motives soon became clear. On September 18th, Soviet envoys in Berlin were shown a map marking Lviv, the oil-rich regions near Drohobych and Boryslav, and the railway corridor at Kolomia as part of the German sphere of interest. The Soviet response was swift, an official protest and a direct order for the Red Army to seize Lviv and all disputed zones at any cost. The next day, Soviet armored units entered the outskirts of Lviv. They fought a brief skirmish with Polish forces, secured the eastern districts, and opened talks for the city's surrender. But suddenly, German troops attacked from the west and south. Caught in the crossfire, Germans on one side, Poles on the other, the Soviets tried to halt the fighting by sending a vehicle under a white flag toward the German lines. The signal was ignored.
With diplomacy exhausted, the Red Army returned fire. In a short but fierce engagement, Soviet tanks destroyed several German anti-tank guns and inflicted heavy casualties. Only after facing real resistance did the German forces cease their attack. This clash near Lviv proves that even on the battlefield, there was no cooperation between the two armies. The idea of a joint invasion collapses under the weight of these facts. What occurred was not partnership but confrontation, each side acting in its own interest, often at the other's expense. Tensions peaked. Full-scale fighting loomed. The Soviets issued another ultimatum: withdraw immediately or face an assault on Lviv. Berlin refused. On September 20th, as the standoff worsened, the German ambassador in Moscow, Count von Schallenberg, urgently met with Molotov, warning that the situation could spark a serious incident. General Kestring made similar appeals to Voroshilov.
The Soviet reply was cold and final. Moscow expressed astonishment that German troops were still east of Lviv, held them responsible for any bloodshed, and warned that the only way to avoid escalation was a full withdrawal. Hitler, realizing Germany was unprepared for an open conflict with the USSR, reluctantly ordered a retreat. On September 20th, the command was issued. The Wehrmacht was to leave Lviv. Furious German generals called it the day of disgrace for the German leadership, but they obeyed. The next morning, September 21st, Soviet forces resumed their advance. Facing the futility of resistance on two fronts, Polish General Langner entered negotiations and agreed to surrender. On September 22nd, Lviv formally passed under Soviet control.
Even then, the German withdrawal was far from peaceful. Skirmishes continued. On September 23rd, Soviet cavalry clashed with Germany's 10th Panzer Division. Similar incidents occurred near Lublin and other parts of eastern Poland. These episodes, ultimatums, armed clashes, diplomatic confrontations, reveal the true nature of the September 1939 campaign. Far from being partners in conquest, the Red Army and the Wehrmacht acted as rivals, each pursuing its own objectives. And when Stalin's ultimatum forced the German army to retreat, it marked a turning point, remembered even by German officers themselves as the day of shame for their command.